Teach, can you hear me? Jero? See, hang up and then call her back. Jero, Teach, can you hear me? Is she clear?
I can. I have such a problem. I'm so sorry. It's a very bad connection today.
Sorry.
I'm not sure what has happened. I've tried to.
Are you using Wi-Fi or 4G?
Tether. I've tried to. I'm using Wi-Fi. I've tried to tether off of my phone. There's something wrong.
A very good morning and welcome back to K24 This Morning. And today we are counting the cost of corruption. I do have with me Irungi Houghton, the Executive Director, Amnesty International, Dennis Anyoka as well, Advocate of the High Court, Gerald Teach, an active citizen, and on phone we have Alex Muteti, the Senior Assistant Director, Public Prosecution. Let us look at our question of the day as we get to some of your feedback to just get a feel of what you're saying, or rather what you feel on the ground. What would convince you that Kenya is winning the war against graft? What would convince you that Kenya is winning the war against graft? Let's take a look at WhatsApp. All right, I can only be convinced that we are on the right track with the war on corruption when senior political leaders who are engaged in these evil practices are prosecuted and jailed. I am Ray Barasa from Tongaren in Bungoma County. Thank you very much, Ray. Corrupt people cannot fight corruption. It's impossible. Corruption in Kenya has been a song to sing. Now, wanaocheza kinanda ni hao viongozi, saying that they are fighting corruption. This is Pastor Martin from Mombasa. Thank you very much, Pastor. And then we have corruption in Kenya can be won if the executive swallows its pride and works with the sectors like judiciary, DPP, DCI by coming up with a multi-sectoral approach that will endeavor to read from the same page. We numerous laws on corruption, or rather we have numerous laws on corruption, but government lacks the goodwill to implement them due to conflict of interest. This is Njenga Kungu from Kihara. Thank you very much, Njenga. I want to go to Muteti, but before we get to Muteti, Dennis, allow me, because a lot of guys in that conversation have mentioned the judiciary and the DCI and the DPP. Do you feel, in your professional opinion, that enough has been done, especially by the executive, coming all the way from the office of the president, trickling down to the offices that actually are in charge of prosecution, starting with the judiciary and, of course, the DPP, who is supposed to be presenting some of these cases to court?
One office that has done very badly is the executive arm of government.
Right.
They have done very poorly because the judiciary needs to be very independent. And the independence, and we've heard the Chief Justice in several occasions say that they are not able to perform several functions because of some level of independence that is lacking. You've heard of this, the Judiciary Fund that has never been operationalized.
Right.
The rules have never been operationalized by Parliament. They have never been passed. They have been drafted. But Parliament has decided not to do its part to operationalize that particular fund. Because if then it was operational, the judicial independence could be absolute. It could be able to do its work without looking like they are begging from the executive. And there is an interrelationship between these arms of government. But in terms of actual execution of mandate in the corruption process, the judicial officer sitting, to arbitrate of a matter, to listen to the evidence presented, will only interact with that evidence at the time the evidence is presented by the prosecution.
Okay.
They have no much option other than make a decision based on the evidence that you have presented, analyzing it against the law that exists. So if the evidence is tampered with, it's not possible for a judicial officer to convict a person. However much we all suspect the person is a thief. Because we have now established principles that, you don't kill a dog by its bad name. If we think this dog steals eggs in the village, when an egg is lost in another home, you don't decide that you're going to, kill it. This particular dog, it must have stolen. It could be possible that a different dog did the stealing or somebody else did this. So there's this challenge. I think for me, the executive needs to have the will to do its part. Parliament needs to make laws for Kenyans, not for themselves. Because most of them, they are making the laws with the fear that should they be found culpable at any stage in time, then they need to be protected. They are actually working to protect themselves. But if they made laws for Kenyans, We made the same laws, and we want everybody to go through the same process, be punished if they are making, they are breaking the law, so that in the fullness of time, it's not about them. Then we will be able to move forward and deal with the corruption problem.
Okay.
And over time, I think we are at the stage in a country where Kenyans feel like corruption is normal.
Okay.
People still, the next scandal, I've said again and again, that, and probably Amnesty International will be here to say the same thing. Maybe the next scandal we'll have in this country is the Ministry of Education, with the 1.9 something billion that they're talking about, the desks where teachers are being told to go back to school, but the schools are not reopening.
Okay.
The next stage will be told there's a lack of accountability. From the onset of that particular tender, we see problems. Look at how they will be able to comply with the Public Procurement and Disposal Act and the regulations. It's not possible when you tell people present your documents within 48 hours. There's no law that allows that. But you see, who is talking about it? Everybody's quiet.
All right.
Kenyans, we are becoming reactionary. In fact, if you could give me a minute to mention something that I had Jerome talk about.
Please do.
Kenyans, we have a role to play. And we play it at 2 stages. The first stage is when you go to elections. Stop electing thieves. We know them. You know the thieves. In fact, at that point, we are not talking about the legality. We are not talking about whether there is evidence of stealing or not. At that point is when we think that Irungu here is a thief.
Yes.
Let me use him as an example. He's not. I'm just using him as an example.
So.
If we think that Irungu is a thief
Yes.
and is asking to occupy public office, don't elect him. At that point, we will not ask him, give us evidence of conviction, whether you were arrested. We are not looking at that. We are looking at what we know.
Let's talk to the gentleman who is in charge of presenting this evidence to court and prosecuting individuals who are caught up. Mr. Alex Muteti, the Senior Assistant Director, Public Prosecution, welcome back to the show. There has been a lot of talk of the relationship between DCI and the office of the DPP. Number one, address if indeed there is any friction coming from that relationship. And number two, any support or lack thereof of you guys executing your work as the DPP or the office of the DPP?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me say this for those who care to look at the Constitution under
Right.
Article 157. The Director of Public Prosecutions only instructs the Inspector General of Police
Yes.
on certain matters.
Okay.
So sometimes when you have institutional, if I were to call it, tough wars,
Yes.
that would definitely affect your relationship. But I would say this, let no one make the mistake of assuming that the so-called perceived differences are by any measure affecting how we do our work. I'll confirm
Yes.
that for our part, we don't care too much about the stories that we read in, out there. People saying, oh, DCI, PPP, see eye to eye.
Right.
I don't know where they pick that from. But the fact is, when it comes to making the decision to prosecute, we exercise that independently. It doesn't matter who feels uncomfortable about the decision that we reach.
Right.
But the fact is, like I think it was Newton who talked about, liberty and how precious it is.
Yes.
We will not drag anybody to court just to satisfy some interests outside the law.
Right.
That one is out of the question.
Okay.
Number two, you've had again the question of persons challenging the DPP's exercise of its power by filing petitions. Actually, one of them is coming up in a short while before one of the judges.
Okay.
But we are not worried about that, because the fact is, as a society, we have become so litigious, and everybody imagines from where they sit, they can challenge literally anything and everything. This Constitution came in with a lot of promise.
Yes.
And Kenyans have really gotten excited, I would say, excited about the access to courts, so that anything you do will most likely attract a legal challenge.
Okay.
But that doesn't worry us because that is why we exist. If people believe that, for example, we cannot enter into a plea bargain, let them come forward and tell us why.
Okay.
Because for me to reach that decision as a prosecutor, I do not look at the face of the person who comes to me. I look at the file that is before me,
Yes.
the evidence that is before me, the public interest considerations.
Yes.
And make no mistake, sometimes the plea bargain may end up giving you the best casualty that you've actually been looking for out there. Because if, for example, a gentleman presents himself and says, I am prepared to admit to the following, but then in return also, you need to give me some concession and I'll give you evidence against this and that other person.
Okay.
I mean, unless you are either grossly incompetent or you do not know exactly what you're doing, you will not seize that opportunity.
Okay.
Is the whole corruption being weaponized? Because I've heard about the concerns that politics may play into it. Persons may be charged on account of other people being interested in having them charged. Let me confirm that from where we sit, that never plays in when you are looking at a file. And the DPP is on record many times. He has said, I have constituted a team to look at this matter and make a decision. There is a reason why that happened.
Okay.
So that the objectivity that we need to put in goes into it, and we have a technical way of assessing the evidence that we have. It may not be in, in the best interest of certain political sections, but that is not exactly what we really care about. Ours is, if there is evidence against you, it doesn't matter where you belong.
Alex, there are some things you've mentioned there. I want you to ponder on them, and then I get back to you. In regards to what you've mentioned, political influence probably in your work, and also you being used as a weapon to sometimes, I don't know, intimidate either members of the public or even members of the political divide. Let me ask Jerotich a question. Jero, if you can hear me. All right.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to hear Jerotich whenever.
All right. I think we've lost her. But now that, let me take this opportunity to re-engage you on that one. Political influence in your work, and sometimes even your office being used as a weapon to intimidate members of the public or even members of parliament and so on and so forth. Because we do see sometimes once a leader in a specific area is being fought politically, as they like to say it, suddenly that person is arrested on a Friday night. Hello, Alex, can you hear me?
Let me say this.
Yes.
First of all, the law allows you to arrest any suspect any day of the week.
Right.
So Friday should not be unique in any sense.
Okay.
Number two, whoever effects that arrest, under the Criminal Procedure Code, they have power to grant bail to those people.
Right.
So that they can return probably the next Monday or the next court day.
Okay.
If it happens not to be the following Monday.
Yes.
So that's really for us at the investigative stage as an office.
Yes.
Our role is very limited.
Okay.
In fact, that is a matter purely for the Inspector General of Police or the Director of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
All right.
Because they are the persons through whom we get these people coming to court.
Okay.
So that for the DPP, once we appear in court, that is when our job proper starts in terms of making decisions that may affect one's liberty or not.
Okay.
For the political question, whether we are used to intimidate certain persons or certain sections of political persuasion, I'll tell you this.
Yes.
Politics by itself can never be a basis for prosecution.
Right.
The fact is, for someone to be arrested, and this I can confirm without any fear of contradiction.
Yes.
Let people forget the idea of running behind political figures and say, I have been caught because of so and so. And we have seen what this country has gone through.
Okay.
Take, for example, in 2008.
Right.
We lost so many lives because of careless talk. If people decide to go on incitement, it doesn't matter which side of the political wing you come from.
Okay.
We will come for you.
All right.
If you decide to commit offenses,
Yes.
please, you will not find any corner in a political office that you can hide. We will get hold of you and we will hold you to account.
Thank you.
So the question of political influence, let people rest and know that really that is not the basis upon which we prefer charges against people.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex, the Assistant Director of the Public Prosecution, for your time. And of course, we shall be re-engaging you later on, different times, of course. Asante sana for your participation. Irungu, Alex has mentioned a couple of things there that let no one be lied to, that this and this is happening on the political side. But you being in touch with citizens on the ground as Amnesty International, do you feel as though these words are just empty, or do they actually mean something?
No, I think it's important that the Office of the DPP continues to reassure people, as should the Inspector General, that the law is applied free, basically without favor or without manipulation.
Right.
And that is really their constitutional mandate. Their constitutional mandate essentially is not to penalize or to punitively go after any individual on the basis of an instruction from a powerful or a privileged person. And I think that is important. I think as Amnesty International, we will continue to monitor those cases, and the cases where we have seen, I guess, abuse of office and abuse of police resources.
Right.
We have spoken up very clearly. And, just my own chairperson, Renee Ngamau, was arrested 2 weeks ago, essentially for trying to protect a public land in her Jamhuri estate.
Right.
She was the chairperson of a community. They had essentially objected to this land being taken over. She was arrested at 7:15 in the evening by 11 police officers in front of her children. And if we had not intervened, she would have spent the night there, and potentially would have just been taken through the court process with some trumped-up charges.
Okay.
That when we saw the evidence that was being assembled, really was just not a match for the charges that she was being preferred against her.
Right.
So I think we have to, as a country, we have to continue to say that the law is not there for a percentage. It is there for the entire country, and it must be protected.
All right. There's an issue that has been raised a couple of times, and I think you've actually even mentioned it, Mr. Dennis, in regards to the judiciary not having funds to operate. And probably for Wanjiku, they would be right there asking themselves, what do we mean that there's no money that has been allocated to the judiciary? Is it that there's no money to pay the judges so they can't get to work? Is it that there's no money to facilitate prosecutors or whoever that needs to be facilitated to actually do their work? When we say lack of funds for the judiciary, what exactly are we talking about?
There are about 2 or 3 levels about financial issue and the judiciary.
Okay.
Firstly, the manner in which the money that has been budgeted for is given to the judiciary. It's more of a favor rather than a right. And that is why you find that we have this request, and many people thought that we need to create the judiciary fund so that this money goes from the consolidated fund directly to this particular fund to run the operation of the judiciary. So that for the money to be released, Treasury does not have to be pleaded. The minister or the cabinet secretary in charge of finance does not have to have that much say, which is an executive appointee, in terms of how much is to be released at what stage. Because we all know that the budget exists, but the funds are released, in segments. It's not wholesome.
All right.
And it's released to meet some finances. So you find that sometimes this money is not released. And that's a problem across the divide. And if we need the judiciary to be independent, then we want them to have their funds, not to behave as if they have to plead with the president, for the president to talk to the cabinet secretary, so that Treasury is able to release funds. That's one aspect.
Okay.
Secondly, the amount of money that has been released. We have an international standard and the percentage of the, the budget that could adequately run a judiciary, which is a very small percentage. I think it's about 1.5 or 2% of that fund.
Yes.
And we've had the Chief just severally say, give us the full amount and see how much we can be able to do. You see, with the amounts we saw last time, Parliament reduced actually the budget for the judiciary. What does that tell you? That they cannot run its programs. As we speak, the judiciary has not appointed magistrates. The Judicial Service Commission has not been able to get magistrates appointed for about 2 years now.
Okay.
They have not employed magistrates. And they are not likely to employ more magistrates.
Okay.
Most of the courts, I'll tell you as a practitioner, stations that should be having 3 or 4 magistrates to effectively run a station, they're having 1 or 2.
Okay.
In fact, most of them are running at half capacity. We have magistrates who have retired, we have magistrates who have, and the judicial officers who have passed on. We have magistrates who are on suspension and are disciplinary, but we don't have replacement for these particular people. So those are the challenges that when it comes to finances, and that needs to be dealt with. But even before I finish that, before I stop giving my commentary on this issue, the truth, when it comes to political interference, when it comes to corruption issues,
right,
unless the DPP did not evaluate what exactly they are doing, they did not sit to look at who are the people that were prosecuted. And Kenyan sitting will tell you that most of the high-end politicians who have been charged were politicians allied to Deputy President William Ruto.
Right.
Maybe that was not a consideration. But how do you convince a Kenyan that truly this was not political when we have other cases where people mentioned appear to be allied to the president, but they are not being charged? And that's what we are saying. Charge across the board. We are not saying don't charge them. Charge these ones, whether they are allied to the deputy president or the president or whoever it is.
Right.
Let everybody be charged. We have, and I'll mention a very simple case here.
Yes.
Ministry of Health. Several months back, we had one container costing 1 million scandal in the Ministry of Health, which was about 5 billion or something like that. It was mentioned that probably the first family could have something to do with it.
Okay.
We don't know how true it is. But we have had nobody convicted. Assuming, I mean, take me as a Kenyan listening to this and being told this one could be possible the conflict, the persons who could have committed this particular crime are associated to the president.
Okay.
They have not been charged. No investigation has been completed several years down the line. Subsequent, scandals,
right,
people perceived to be associated to a deputy president have quickly been charged and taken to court, even without evidence, and many of them now, the case are stalled, they are not moving. So when we have this perception, and that's what we are talking about, it may not be true. It may not be true that these people are related to the president or the deputy president.
Right.
But the perception of political influence needs to be cleaned off by the DPP by going for everybody equally.
Okay. Mr. Irungu,
Sure.
The fact that he's mentioning this, again, something we had mentioned earlier, we've even asked Mr. Alex from the office of the DPP. Clearly, it sounds as though sometimes there is unfair treatment, and this is used as a weapon sometimes. Suddenly, when you're not aligned in a particular direction, suddenly evidence against you that you did some corruption deal 5 years ago emerges, and there you go, you're arrested. Are we using the office of the DPP, or rather certain quarters using the office of the DPP as a political weapon?
So I think that the key thing to get is that the criminal justice system, it's an ecosystem, right? So you can essentially stop a case at very many different levels. You can stop it at the level of the investigations by simply tampering with the evidence. You can stop it at the level of the prosecution by ensuring that the suspects are not charged. You can essentially stop it at the level of the judiciary to make sure that actually the case drags on, is forgotten, somehow disappears into the ether, or people are acquitted when they should have been convicted.
Right.
So there's a whole spectrum of things, and each of the cases, in a sense, tend to be very different. I remember, about 4 years ago, I was sitting across the table from somebody who said, "I'm the poster child for corruption," and I said, well, "What do you mean? Do you mean the poster child for anti-corruption or corruption?"
Or advocating for it.
And she explained to me how she set up a company that essentially had been supplying to the government. And she very openly just shared with me her whole path. And essentially our courts are essentially a ecosystem of corruption, right? From court clerks that can be bought, from journalists that can be bought, from editors that can be bought to make sure that the story never gets into the papers, to judicial officers who can make sure that it only goes before a certain judge and not other judge. So it's a very complex process, and I think that's why there needs to be vigilance constantly from the public and from the institutions, and that's why it's very important to have a separation of powers between these institutions, because in some ways with the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, they are able to follow up cases that perhaps would have been stopped by the police or by I guess in the later stages by the Director of Public Prosecutions or the judiciary. And I think the last thing I just wanted to say was Twalib, Wana Twalib of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission last week said something really important. He was at I think it was at a Media Council event where he said that the relationship between journalists and corruption investigators is critical, and that the expose by one of your competitors during the KEMSA scandal essentially saved the country billions, right? Because it interrupted what was about to continue in terms of pillage. And I think that's really important. The last one I wanted to raise with you a little bit.
The very last one.
Very last one.
Okay, we are running out of time.
We've talked about lawyers, we've talked about prosecutors, we have not talked about accountants and auditors. We are running, as Amnesty International, with ISPAC, the Institute for Chartered Accountants, we are running a program with accountants to look at what is the human rights cost of corruption. And what we found is very interesting. Over 50%, or rather, most of the accountants that we've surveyed experience corruption almost on a 1 to 2 basis. It's 50%. But yet, only 30% feel that exposing that corruption to a third party, to a journalist, or to an investigator, only 30% will do that. And I think that's where the challenge also lies, because behind every corruption case, there will be an accountant or there will be an auditor.
And that is where we bring it to a stop. But before we go, let's look at some of your feedback in regards to a question of the day, where we asked you what would convince you that Kenya is winning the war against graft. Let's check out what you're saying on WhatsApp so that we can get a feel. Now, it is a culture, a bad one. Good leaders with intention to change the system either get frustrated, threatened, or worse, killed, or gradually get assimilated into the culture. It is difficult to change culture unless you are all singing the same tune. Corruption in Kenya has gotten worse, and leaders are actually comfortable doing the wrong thing, probably because everyone is doing it so they can get away with it. This is Judy from Eldoret. Judy, indeed, you've summarized it all right there. We also have, how can corruption end with just the other day, an MP was convicted and jailed. He appealed and is now out and back in Parliament. Was he really jailed because he had not been shaved his hairstyle? Was still intact? Well, this is Sam from Kwale County. Mbuvi and the panel, good morning. I will only be convinced that corruption will end in Kenya if they treat those cases just like presidential petition. Just like the latter, let there be a timeline. We can't prosecute serious corruption cases for centuries. This is Danson Mureithi in Mararao. Thank you very much, Danson. We come to the end of that particular segment. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Indeed, this is a conversation that looks like it might actually continue again. Up until that time, we get solutions. Do not go anywhere. We are coming back on the other side with Interactive. We'll be right back.